Hey friends, welcome to the first video of the new year and I hope you're doing really well. It's been over a month I believe since I last posted a video, so I'm really sorry about the absence. Back in December I ended up getting really sick with the flu and it took about 2 weeks for that to go, and then before I knew it, it was Christmas and New Year's, and Ian's birthday is also on New Year's Eve, so there was just a lot to prepare and a lot going on. And so since I never got to film a wrap-up video for you guys, I thought that I'd kick off this year with a summary of some of my favorite books from last year. I'll also be sharing some fun reading stats, and we're gonna go chronologically this year. I'm starting from January to December and picking out a couple books that really stood out to me from those months. But I have a feeling that this is going to be a very long video, so I hope you guys have a cozy drink to keep you company, and let's get into the video. I've got my iPad here with me so that I can keep a track of everything, but to start off with, let's begin with January. So in January I read 7 books and it was definitely one of the best reading months of the year, just in terms of the quality of books I was reading. So I have 5 books in January that I want to touch upon because they were just all amazing. The first one being A Woman in the Polar Night by Christiane Ritter. This is a non-fiction title that I loved reading at the start of last year. It was so perfect for winter. It's all about Christiane Ritter, who was an artist from Austria, I believe, and she spends a year in Antarctica with her husband. You get to see her face so many different fears and become independent, and it's just such a wonderful memoir to read, especially during this time of year when it's really cold outside. I think because Christiane Ritter is an artist, she had such a wonderful way of describing to you what Antarctica was like, and it also had some of the sketches that Christiane drew as she was in Antarctica. So overall I thought there was so much to learn from this incredible memoir. So definitely that was one of my favorite non-fictions that I read this year. Not that I read very many non-fiction books. The second book I wanted to feature in January was The Storied Life of AJ Fikry by Gabrielle Zevin. This one is all about AJ, who is a grumpy bookstore owner, and I thought it was the most heartwarming and heartbreaking stories to read, and this definitely is probably one of my favorite books of the entire year. AJ's life is kind of falling apart. He just lost his wife and his bookshop isn't doing very well, and on top of that his most prized rare first edition book has been stolen from the shop, and so yeah, he is really going through a rough patch in his life, to say the least. But then one day a little girl called Maya turns up to the bookshop and AJ ends up having to look after her. So it's a really beautiful relationship between AJ and Maya, and in addition to that there is also a romance in the story later on. And so yeah, it's just such a beautiful depiction of what it looks like to heal and the ways in which books can touch us and have an impact on our lives. So I sobbed in this one. This one really broke me, and if you haven't already read it, then The Storied Life of AJ Fikry will for sure warm your heart. Moving on, we have Yellowface, which was another book I read in January and another one that I really enjoyed. This one is definitely more drama filled. It's intense, there's suspense, there's a bit of like a thrillery nature to it. It's of course by one of my favorite authors, R.F. Kuang. To be honest, Yellowface is probably one of the books from R.F. Kuang that I was least excited to read. I just wasn't sure if I would particularly enjoy reading about a satire of the book publishing industry. However, I listened to this via audiobook and I fell in love with the story. It was so fast-paced, so intense, and it was so razor sharp. But Yellowface is about a woman called June who ends up stealing her dead friend's manuscript and ends up passing it as her own. So there's a lot of commentary on borrowed identity, on the publishing industry, that I found really insightful and interesting. It did get a little little repetitive at the end, which is why I don't think I gave it 5 stars, but I had a really entertaining time with this book, so definitely wanted to talk about this one. And then I also read or reread Emily Wild's Encyclopedia of Fairies by Heather Fawcett in January of 2025. This is hands down one of my favourite books to read in winter. It's such an atmospheric, cozy exploration of the Fae and academia, and I hadn't read books 2 and 3, but I knew that I wanted to read it in 2025, so I thought I would reread this book so that everything was really fresh in my memory. I almost feel like I enjoyed it more the second time around just because I knew what I was looking for going into it, and I love the relationship between Emily and Wendell and seeing them two again. Emily is a professor of fairies from Cambridge, and she goes on a bit of an expedition, a bit of a case study to this land. I think it's called Yosland, and I believe that is kind of like loosely based off of Finland or Iceland, and her rival ends up following her all the way to Yosland, and there the two of them explore and try to do a bit of research on the local fae or the winter fae. This book remains still so fresh and vivid in my mind just because I adored these characters and the world that Heather Fawcett created so much. And then the final book of January that I wanted to feature was The Lantern of Lost Memories by Tanaka Hiragi. This is a Japanese magical realism novel, and I just adored my time with it. I read it as an ebook, which is why I don't have a copy, but it's set in a photo studio that acts as a sort of purgatory between life and death, and they basically welcome those who have recently passed away, and they give those people a chance to go through all the photos of their life or little snippets of their life and see them all and reflect on them before moving on. And it's just such a poetic exploration of memories, of the memories that we make as we live on this earth. As typical of this healing genre of Korean and Japanese literature, it's split into multiple different viewpoints, so each chapter is a little bit longer and it spends all its time with one character, but that way you get to dive into these people's lives and the lives that they led as they were living. I will say there are a couple stories that are a little bit more very dark actually. It talks about child abuse and domestic violence, so yeah, definitely do be warned of those trigger warnings. And I feel like I've read quite a few healing fiction novels where I just wasn't really gripped by them and I was getting a little bit bored of the genre actually, but with this particular one I found myself really immersed in each character's life and story, and I was moved from the very first chapter, so definitely wanted to talk about this one. And then moving into February, I ended up reading 7 books in February also, and I think that's about like the average number of books read each month. I haven't worked it out, but I think it's around 7 books. Anyways, I have 2 books from February that I wanted to talk about briefly. The first being The Hen Who Dreamed She Could Fly by Hwang Seon-mi. This is a Korean fiction novel that I feel like I've talked about quite a bit on my channel this year or the past year, but it's like a Korean Charlotte's Web story, or I like to say it's like a Charlotte's Web meets Animal Farm. It's a very short story, but it really touches upon what it's like to be a mother in Korea and what motherhood is like and viewed as a society in Korea. And you follow Sprout, who is a hen on this farm, and she is really fed up, I suppose, of having all her eggs be taken away from her, and so she decides one day to rebel and try and hatch her own egg by fleeing from this farm. And life proves to be very difficult. Freedom isn't as easy as she imagines it to be, and she goes through so many different hardships. I feel like it was a very stunning and moving short story, and I really enjoyed my time with it. And the second title I wanted to feature was Dostoevsky's White Nights. I feel like this is my only Russian fiction of 2025, which is really disappointing actually, because I set out wanting to read more Russian literature, so I'm gonna have to do that this year instead, I think. But White Nights blew up on BookTok and Bookstagram, and so I was really interested and intrigued to have a dig and see what all the hype was about. This little story is about a man who is going through through an experience of unrequited love. So Fyodor Dostoevsky talks a lot about loneliness and explores this concept in a very dreamy, poetic and beautiful way. There are so many memorable quotes in here that I just fell in love with, and so if you're looking for a short story this year, then I recommend White Nights. Now, moving on to March, I ended up reading 9 books in March 2025, which I was very pleased with, so clearly I had a good reading month then. But for the very first book I wanted to talk about, I want to feature, where is it? A Sky Painted Gold by Laura Wood. Again, I feel like I've blabbed on and on about A Sky Painted Gold last year, but that's just how much I loved and adored it. If you're looking for a coming of age book that is dreamy and lyrical and also very nostalgic, then A Sky Painted Gold definitely has to be on your summer TBR radar. This is a Great Gatsby inspired novel. It's set in the Roaring 20s, or just at the end of it actually, but you follow a girl called Lou who I believe has just turned 16, but she ends up being invited to the Cardew house, and the Cardews are a very enigmatic family. People don't really know who they are, but they seem to be quite famous, and they throw these huge elaborate parties every summer. And it's about Lou as she sort of navigates the relationship between herself and the Cardews, and there's romance in it, there's friendship in it, there's a lot of like I capture the castle atmosphere. It's an absolutely gorgeous, sultry book, so I highly recommend this one for your summer TBR. The next book I really enjoyed was If You Could See the Sun by Anne Liang, and this is a magical realism, or I suppose it has hints of magical realism, and it's a contemporary romance. It's about Alice, who has always felt invisible at school. She is the only student at a very prestigious and wealthy boarding school who is on scholarship. So when her parents announce that they can no longer afford her tuition, Alice ends up taking matters into her own hands. Alice actually one day turns invisible, and she decides to use this to her advantage by listening to people's secrets at school and then getting some money out of it basically. But in order to do so, she ends up partnering with her rival Henry, and I loved the two of them and their relationship. It's a YA novel, so it's not the most fleshed out, I don't think, but I found myself so gripped by this book, and the stakes are really high, so it's very dramatic, and yeah, I really enjoyed this one. Another book I really enjoyed was The Rose Bargain by Sasha Payton Smith, and I think book 2 is actually coming out this year. But every spring I love reading Regency romance and Fae romance, and so this book was perfect in that it delivered on everything that I was wanting to read at the time. It's a Fae Regency love story. To be honest, my mind's a little bit fuzzy about the particular details of this story, but it's pretty much set around this ball, this competition that is hosted by the Queen, and the Queen of England is a Fae reigning queen. So she's a fairy, and she is trying to find a wife for her son Prince Bram. So a competition ensues with all the different debutantes fighting to be the new wife of Prince Bram and the new princess of England. I always love a good competition in a book, and I find it really entertaining to read about different trials that are a part of the competition, which is exactly what this book delivered on. All the Fae trials had a hint of darkness, and as the book progresses you see that unfold even more, and so I thought that it was a perfect balance between romance and magic and Fae and Regency. So overall, yeah, I had a really fun time with it. Another book I loved and just fell head over heels in love with was The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang, and this is the first book in the Poppy War trilogy. I also talked a lot about this one last year, but there's just so much to unpack in this pretty chunky novel actually, and this one book felt like it was 3 books meshed in one, but in a really good way. It's based on the bloody history of ancient China. It's a military epic fantasy, or an epic military fantasy, so there's a lot going on. It's very dark and morose, but you follow Rin, who is an orphan from a poor province, and she ends up going to the capital to take this test to essentially find the most skilled and intelligent individuals across the kingdom and the empire. And she ends up actually acing the test, much to the annoyance of a lot of people in the kingdom. And once she enters the military academy as well, there's a lot of prejudice that she has to fight against her classmates, and she's very much unwelcome. I think that was actually my favorite part of this story. I loved the academy setting and getting to see the different classes that Rin was taking and the interactions and dynamic between her and her classmates and her teachers. But that only makes up a portion of the story, because war comes along pretty soon and Rin and her classmates are forced to practice what they've learnt in their lessons out in practice on the battlefield. So like I mentioned, it gets very dark and grim very quickly. Oh, I might add as well, this is really emotional. I felt like I was on an emotional roller coaster whilst reading this, as I often feel with R.F. Kuang novels. She definitely doesn't write light stories, safe to say, but if you're looking to dive into an epic series this year, The Poppy War is a great place to start. And then another book that really stood out to me in March, was When Stars Are Scattered by Omar Mohammed and illustrated by Victoria Jameson. So this is a graphic novel that I found extremely moving and captivating. This is a true story based on the experience of the author as a refugee, and in this book you follow two brothers who are at a Kenyan refugee camp. I think it's very easy to think that a refugee camp is a very temporary place, but for these boys, they've already been at the camp for 7 years. So as you can imagine, this book is a very heart-wrenching story, and I felt like I grew really attached to these two characters, and especially the main brother that you follow. It's just so inspiring and really humbling as well. I think I've mentioned before about how I thought this was a very important story to read about, and I still stand by that. So if you're looking for a very moving and intimate graphic novel this year, then I do really recommend When Stars Are Scattered. Moving on to April, I ended up reading 7 books in April, but only 2 books stood out in particular to me. The first is another graphic novel, and this one was by Tim Probert, and it's book 1 to the Lightfall series. This one really stood out to me for its gorgeous artwork. I thought it was absolutely mind-blowing how incredibly Tim Probert illustrated this book. For instance, this is one of the pages is just so lovingly drawn and just so well drawn as well. This is a full spread and you can see how cinematic it is. I just think he has the best style, but it also happens to have the most amazing premise, and you follow B, who is the adopted granddaughter of a prominent pig wizard. But B ends up interacting Cad, who is this Galdurian here, and he is a part of a race that was long thought to be extinct, and so this is obviously very big news. And when the pig wizard ends up going missing, B and Cad end up teaming up together and going out into the wild to try and find him, and I thought it was really wholesome and heartwarming. It's very adventurous in an approachable and cozy manner, so I really enjoyed my time with it. And April also happened to be the month where I started rereading 6 of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. If you watched a lot of my videos last year, you'll know that a lot of the earlier months of 2025 I spent rereading and trying to refresh my memories on the entire Grishaverse, which I had a lot of fun doing actually. But 6 of Crows was a book that I'd read as a teenager, and so a lot of the details were very fuzzy, and it almost felt like I was reading the book for the first time, which was an amazing, incredible experience. Rereading this in April just reminded me of how much I adored this book when I was younger, and the found family aspect, which is one of my favorite tropes to read about, was so good in this particular duology. It's about 6 6 criminals who undertake this ridiculous mission, this ridiculous heist, and about how they team up together and they find a family with each other. It's jam-packed with politics and romance, and yeah, I just love this one. Now moving on to May. In May I read 9 books, so another really great reading month for me, but one of the first ones that really stood out to me was Happy All the Time by Laurie Colwin. In all honesty, this was definitely a cover purchase. I couldn't resist getting this gorgeous pastel book during May when it was spring and the weather was getting warmer, and yeah, this just seemed like the perfect book to pick up, and it really was. This one is a rom-com that is reminiscent of Sally Rooney, just in America, and you follow 2 best friends and their love lives and the ways in which all 4 of them interact with each other, and I just found the writing so gorgeous. You know, she's essentially just writing mundane everyday things in life, but she presents it in such a charming and captivating way. I just thought it was absolutely magnificent, and so many gorgeous quotes on love as well. Now, May also happened to be the month where I found one of my all-time favorite series, and it is A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik. I was kind of looking forward to reading this, but it was definitely one that wasn't a priority one for me for a good few years now. So I was really taken aback when I became extremely absorbed in the very first book, and then promptly bought books 2 and then now books 3 as well. The main character, Elle, is at a boarding school for those who are magically gifted, except this boarding school is extremely dangerous and tons and tons of students, if not most of them, die each year because there's like these different monsters inside the school. However, parents continue to send their children to this school despite all of that, because the mortality rate is even worse if you're outside of the school. And now our main character, Elle, is very sharp and a very sort of cynical character. She's really fun to read from actually, but she isn't liked by anybody at school because they're all a little bit afraid of her. And so when Orion, the school's golden boy, ends up actually taking a bit of an interest in her, it's a whole new situation for everybody involved at school, and I loved seeing the 2 of them and their relationship throughout the series grow, and I just loved this school. It's just a really weird, wonderful, magical environment and setting, and yeah, I felt like this one was so entertaining. And then the third and last book that really stood out to me in May was 84 Charing Cross Road by Helene Hanff. This is a non-fiction title, and it's a series of letters that Helene Hanff exchanged with the bookshop owners and bookshop employees at 84 Charing Cross Road. This one is really poignant, I think, because it is an epistolary format, and the letters that are exchanged between the different people, because it's real life exchanges, there's just something really special about getting a glimpse into people's lives and their letters in particular. I feel like the art of letter writing and reading is very introspective and a very wonderful meditative exercise. I did a lot of annotating, a lot of highlighting in this one. Definitely one of my favorite stories or books about books. Okay, next up, we've reached halfway through the year now. We are at June, and in June I read 6 books, and 2 books really stood out to me in particular. The first one being All the Lovers in the Night by Mieko Kawakami, which I have just behind me here. June was the month I started my book club with my friends, and it was just the best start to a book club, and we read All the Lovers in the Night. It happened to be my book club pick, and I don't think I ended up rating it very highly, maybe 3.5 stars at most. But I ended up just, I don't know, this book really ends up lingering in my mind a lot, and for various different reasons it sort of approached me as a very poignant novel despite me not particularly enjoying every moment of it. All the Lovers in the Night is a really wonderful portrayal of day-to-day life in Japan, following 2 slightly odd, slightly different characters. There is a romance between these 2 characters, but I wouldn't say it's in the most most conventional way at all. And I've only read 2 of Miyako Kawakami's books, but from what I can tell, she doesn't shy away from harsh reality. So there are some dark scenes, actually very dark scenes in this book. So I would check the trigger warnings out actually. But I just thought that Miyako Kawakami had just a stunning way of writing. Hands down, this has one of the best and most beautiful openings to any novel that I've read recently. It opens up with, why does the night have to be so beautiful? And if you know me, you'll know that I adore books written about night and the otherworldly essence of the dark, and I was so entranced by it. So definitely this one has stood out to me amongst all the different books that I've read this year. And then the other book was Graveyard Shift by ML Rio, and the reason this one stood out to me, despite it also being one of the most disappointing books of the year, is because I adored what was written in this book, and what failed me was the possibilities of what this book could have been had ML Rio chosen to explore it a little further. It's such a short book, but this is about different people who are kind of friends or acquaintances because they share the night shift together, and so every evening they are at this cemetery smoking and having a little bit of break during their night shifts. It starts in October and it takes place over a couple of nights during the middle of night, and it's really atmospheric and moody. And because it's a horror novel, there is a very secretive element to it that I really enjoyed reading, and it's a little bit unsettling as well. But I thought it was a shame that the book stopped where it did, because and I'm sure a lot of other people, according to Goodreads, were hoping for a lot more. I feel like that doesn't discredit how much I really did enjoy reading this, and so this one has stuck through with me until the end of the year. And now we're at July, and I feel like every single year July happens to be the point where I just drop in terms of how many books I read. I feel like I really go through a little bit of a rough patch every July for some reason. So I read 5 books in July, but 3 nonetheless still stood out to me, and I actually really enjoyed these books. One of them being Return to the Delicate Dream Department Store by Ahya, and this is of course the sequel to The Delicate Dream Department Store, which is one of my favorite books of all time. It's a Korean magical realism novel that explores the idea of there being a shopping center or a department store that sells dreams in your dreams. It's such a fun, quirky concept that really just tickles my brain, and I really love reading about things like this, about dreams and about what goes on when we dream. I did prefer book 1 to book 2, but it was still really interesting seeing the world expand and Ymir taking us on new adventures and meeting new characters. I feel like the world that she's created is so fascinating and intriguing, and I definitely really enjoyed this one. I also happened to reread book 1 of Nevermore, The Trials of Morrigan Crow, because I was planning on reading Silverball when it came out this year, so I knew that I wanted to try and again refresh my memories between books 1 and 3. I feel like I've reread this book maybe 3 times now, and every single time I just fall more and more in love with it, and I really recommend the audiobook because the narrator does such an incredible job of capturing the different essences of each character. I can only imagine how much I would have adored this book as a child because of how magical and dreamy I find it now, and it's definitely not just a book for children. It's like Harry Potter, I'd say. It's a fantasy series that you can keep coming back to and you can grow old with, and these characters just stay with you. The world building in this is so grand and the characters are so vivid and memorable, and I loved getting to see the different trials that Morrigan had to undertake in order to get into the academy. I should really say the Wondrous Society, because that is a society that Morrigan is trying trying to get into in book 1. So this one was so much fun to revisit, and I know that I'll just keep coming back to it over the years. Another book that stood out to me was Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson, and one of the reasons this stood out to me was because I was so relieved and excited that I'd finally finished this one. It had been sitting on my TBR shelves for a while because I'd bought the hardback edition the first time round. I'd attempted to read it maybe twice before DNFing them both times, so this year was my third time reading it and I really enjoyed it. It was definitely a lot of humour and it was a fun take on the classic fairy tale. Tress is in love with this really sweet boy called Charlie, and when Charlie gets whisked away, Tress decides it's up to her to try and save him, and she undergoes this crazy mission to try and find him across the Emerald Sea. But this one was so warm and fun to read about, and again, this one has a bit of a found family in it, which was really sweet, so I did want to quickly mention this one. Okay, so now we're at August, and August was definitely a much better reading month for me. I read 7 books and I loved almost every single one that I read. One of them being Summer at Mount Ashama by Masashi Matsuya, and this is a Japanese novel translated into the English. I think the reason why this one stood out to me was that at this point I was looking and craving a Japanese fiction novel that wasn't necessarily in the magical realism genre, and this one really hit the spot for me. It was August, it was boiling, it was sweltering, and I was reading Summer at Mount Ashama, which was just really timely. But this one follows a group of architects as they undergo this competition to try and win the privilege of designing the new library in Tokyo. This one is definitely a little bit more textbook-like. It's quite educational actually. There's a lot of non-fiction facts thrown in here that I feel like some people might be a bit thrown by. I was definitely thrown off by it at first. I came to appreciate that that was just a part of the atmosphere and the tone that Masashi Matsuya was trying to evoke. So out of all the books I read in August, this one definitely stood out to me. But the real cherry on top for July was that I'd read 3 Summers by Margarita Liberacki, which is a Greek translated fiction. This is another coming of age story about 3 sisters who spend 3 summers together in their countryside home a little bit further out from Athens in Greece, and it's the most atmospheric and luscious and sultry book ever. I just felt like it captured summer and it captured girlhood and sweltering days and longing and childhood innocence and first love, and I happened to read it during my holiday to Athens last year, which was the most perfect way to enjoy Athens. There's a very hazy and smoky quality to the writing that I really enjoyed, and so I really recommend this for, again, another one for your summer TBR. We are slowly approaching the end of the year and the end of this list, but in September I managed to read 9 books, and I think I had overall a really great reading month again. I started off with The Last Graduate, which of course was book 2 to A Deadly Education, and I enjoyed it just as much as the first one, if not more, in that I sort of knew the tone of the book. The stakes continued to be high, the tension between Elle and Orion was just incredible, and the way that this book ended is just the biggest cliffhanger you'll read. If it were up to me, I would have finished the 3rd one by now, but I had a little bit of a fiasco. I ordered book 3 straight after reading this online from Waterstones, but then it came damaged and then I returned it and it was stuck in the process of being returned for months, but I finally just the other day received a brand new copy of book 3, which is the final book in this trilogy. So I'm really excited to pick up the 3rd book, and really sad actually that is going to be the end of my journey with a deadly education and the Scholarman series. Now, another book that really stood out to me in September was Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes, and this is a sci-fi literary novel, I would say. But this was September's book club pick with my friends, and it was something I really didn't have much interest going into, and I don't think I even voted for this one for September, but this ended up winning the majority of votes, and I'm so glad that it did, because otherwise I never would have read this gem of a novel. It's about a floor sweeper called Charlie who has an IQ of 68, and so he really struggles to understand the world around him. And there's this experiment going on that's a little bit hush-hush, but the experiment is all about artificially increasing human intelligence and turning people like Charlie into geniuses. And so, as you can imagine, there is a lot of exploration on the morality behind all of this, what it really means to be intelligent and to be a human being, and to see the relationship between being smart and then being human. I would say that if you're someone like me who is a little bit shy when it comes to sci-fi, or even a little bit turned off from a book if it's labeled as sci-fi, then try to ignore that element and just go into this, because it feels more like a literary exploration of, like I said, intelligence and the morals and the morality behind it. It's structured in such a clever way, and so it's one that I would definitely recommend reading physically so that you get to experience it in all its glory. And I really had a moment in September, because then I finished off with Heaven by Bieko Kawakami, and oh my goodness, this book is a literary gem. It's another Japanese novel, and it's about a boy and a girl who are at the same school. They're in the same class, but they're bullied for very different reasons. You follow mainly from the perspective of the boy, who has a lazy eye, and his classmates torment him about it endlessly. So when he one day receives a letter from the girl who is also being bullied, the two of them have never previously interacted before, but she writes him a letter asking him if he wants to be friends with her. And so from that point onwards, the two of them grow a friendship that is built on a mutual challenge. On the back, it's described as unflinching yet tender, and that's exactly how the book comes across. It's very dark and really difficult to read about in some places, but it's a very real and raw presentation. So I am extremely grateful that I picked this one up in September, and yeah, I still can't stop thinking about how this book made me feel. And now we are at October. In October I read 6 books, which to be honest was a little bit disappointing for me, because I feel like October is a time of year where everybody is really serious about getting into their reading. It's such an atmospheric time and perfect for book shopping and the whole book aesthetic. But for that very reason, I found there to be a lot of pressure to try and read good autumnal books. So that sort of didn't work out very well, and I found myself getting a little bit stressed by it, if anything. So that was unfortunate, but I did manage to read 2 really amazing books, and the first one was Catabasis by R.F. Kuang. This was one of my most anticipated books of the year, and perhaps a little bit too highly anticipated. It definitely didn't play out in the way that I thought it was going to, but I enjoyed it nonetheless. It's all about Alice Law and her rival Peter, who are studying for their PhDs, I think, except their professor goes missing one day, and in order to track him down, they have to go all the way to hell. I think what I really enjoyed about this book that maybe threw me off at the same time was how philosophical it was. It was so intense on the academia, which I feel like I probably should have expected from Babel, but it's far more academic than that one. I also didn't feel much of a connection between Alice and Peter, and yeah, I didn't love their relationship particularly either. It wasn't very believable to me basically, but at the same time I still felt really attached to their existential journey all the way into hell, and I thought that it was a really cool elaboration of Dante's Inferno. So I thought that for those conceptual reasons I really enjoyed this book, even though it wasn't quite what I thought it was gonna be. But the other book I really loved and enjoyed in October was Shady Hollow by Juno Black. This was on my TBR for a very long time because it was always on people's cozy books to read list, and I'd just never gotten around to it. I'm just gonna grab some tea, which is in front of me, because my throat is getting very, very parched. There we go, that's a bit better. But yes, I thought that October was going to be the perfect time of year to pick Shady Hollow up, and it really was. Shady Hollow is this woodland neighborhood where animals and critters of all different shapes and sizes live together in harmony until one day there is a murder, and Vera Vixen, the resident detective, ends up trying to figure out and solve this murder. Honestly, it was just so cozy. It was exactly what I was looking for at that time of year. I was very quickly swept into this whole neighborhood and Shady Hollow, and I thought that it was really fun reading about these different anthropomorphic characters. It was very reminiscent of The Wind in the Willows, which is one of my favorite classics of all time. It's just that with a touch of murder mysteries. Moving on into November, I read 7 books, and one really stood out to me in particular. Actually, I have got 2 written down here, but the first one was The Moonlight Market by Joanne Harris. This is like a magical realism or historical fiction magical realism. As I was reading this, I felt like I was being spirited away into this whole other reality right in the heart of London. And this book is about Tom, who is a photographer working in King's Cross, London, and he has this chance encounter with this beautiful girl called Vanessa, and he ends up falling in love with her. However, Vanessa ends up disappearing right before his eyes, and so ensues this entire journey as Tom tries to find her. And along the journey, he ends up encountering these almost mythical beings, the moths and the butterflies. These 2 different peoples have been at war with each other for a very long time, divided by the Moth King and the Butterfly Queen, and Tom finds himself stuck right in the middle of it. So I thought that this was a really wonderful, very folk-like and fairy tale-like story. I will say though that the ending felt a little bit rushed to me and a little bit all over the place in terms of pacing. But looking past all of that, I thought that it was such an atmospheric and gorgeously written book. And then I also happened to read Silverborn by Jessica Townsend, which is book 4 in the Nevermore series. And gosh, I was just so excited and really looking forward to reading this book. It felt like a dream come true that this book was finally here, because it took years for us to get there. A lot of you guys warned me that book 4, Silverborn, was going to be slightly different from the tones of the first 3, so I was sort of prepared going into it, and I'm glad that you guys told me, because yeah, it definitely felt very different. Was it my favorite Nevermore book? Probably not. It felt a lot like a murder mystery, and that sort of was what the whole book was centered about, which I didn't love necessarily, but I thought it was really well done and well thought through, and I did enjoy getting to know a little bit more about the Silver District and seeing the Nevermore world grow. Actually, the more I talk about this book, the more I'm unsure as to whether I should be including it on this list, because I just remembered that I really hated Morrigan in this book. She's definitely going through her teenage angst years, and her arguments and constant misunderstandings with Jupiter was really starting to get on my nerve halfway through the book, and so that definitely ruined my reading experience. So maybe this book shouldn't be on this list, but the reason why I initially added it was because I was just really excited to read it, and I was really glad that I read it. So we are now moving on into December, the final month of the year, and in December I read 10 books, largely because I felt this urgency in trying to meet or read as many books as I could before the end of the year. And so the first one that I want to mention is Moondial by Helen Cresswell, and this is a children's classic. It's definitely got a little bit of a magical realism undertone to it, which I loved, and it's a story about a young girl called Minty. Minty ends up having to stay at this acquaintance's house during her October half term, and she begins to notice things that are slightly unusual. One day she stumbles upon this sundial, or moondial as she later calls it, and essentially it's a time machine, and she bumps into different people and characters who lived on the same property just during different times. It's a very quiet ghost story that is classic, so if you're on the lookout for a slightly creepy children's ghost story, then I do recommend Moondial. Another book that I absolutely fell in love with was my reread of Claire Keegan's So Late in the Day. This was a little bit of an unexpected book to reread and enjoy because I'd walked into the second-hand bookshop one day in December and they had a copy of this one and also another Claire Keegan novel called Foster. But I wasn't going to pick So Late in the Day up just because I'd read it, or I'd listened to it as an audiobook a little while ago, and I didn't love it as much as I was hoping to. So I remember finishing that book a little bit disappointed, thinking that it was just like a 3-star novel. But the lovely lady who was working at the bookshop was really recommending me to give this one another shot and to read it. So I decided to pick it up and I went to a nearby cafe on the same day and finished it in a very short time because it's so short. For some reason, it really worked for me the second time round, so I feel like that's a sign to give books that maybe you didn't love the first time round and give it another shot, because there's a possibility of falling in love with it. It's about a man called Cathal who is living a very mundane, ordinary life until he meets a woman called Sabine, and he's recounting all the things that went wrong in their relationship as well as what could have been. And I felt like it was a very powerful story with very limited words, but with those limitations in place, I felt like Claire Keegan was able to really draw you in as a reader and invite you to question the relationship between Sabine and Cathal and Cathal's perspective on things. So I was really glad and grateful to the lady for encouraging me to pick this one up this time round. Now, another one I read was Watermoon by Samantha Soto Yambao, and this is a fantasy romance or like magical realism. Actually, it's a little bit more on the fantasy side of speculative fiction. Anyways, I was really looking forward to picking this one up as soon as I heard about it a while ago, and I was really glad that I finally managed to read it before the end of 2025. The reason why I'm including this on this list of favourite books, despite the fact that I didn't end up loving it as much as I was hoping to, is because I found the world so incredibly magical and otherworldly. It's about a girl called Hannah, and she is working at a pawn shop, and one day this stranger walks in onto one of the worst days of her life. She's just had a robbery on her first day on the job, and her father also happens to go missing on top of all of that, and so the stranger offers to help Hannah try to find him and try to understand what's going on. They go on a little bit of an epic adventure, I would say, as they see different people and different weird creatures. It is, of course, very Studio Ghibli-esque and reminiscent of a lot of themes in Studio Ghibli that I was really happy to read. The reason why it wasn't a 5-star read though is because I didn't love the love story. I thought it could have been fleshed out a lot more. So yeah, I wasn't particularly fond of that, but I thought it was really magical. So yeah, that's Watermoon. The second last book I have to feature is Sabahat Ali's Madonna in a Fur Coat. If you guys have read White Nights and if you enjoyed it, I feel like you would enjoy this one just as much or even more, because Madonna in a Fur Coat is also similarly about a man who is reminiscing over his lost love and unrequited love. The perspective is very interesting because it's from the point of view of a man who is a colleague of the man that you're reading about. I feel like that wasn't a good description. So basically, there is a man who is ill and is very, very sick, and he is thinking about the missed opportunities and his long lost love. And at his bedside is a colleague of his who is very interested in this man because he's a very quiet man. He's very unobtrusive and slightly different from everybody else, and he essentially has the permission to go through the diary entries of the sick man, and from there you get to understand why the man acts like the way he does and his philosophy and his regrets. And I thought it was a really beautiful, passionate and really heartbreaking story to read about. I found it a little bit confusing at first because I wasn't sure where we were at the story because of the particular POV you're following, but quickly I became enamored with it, and by the end of it I was like ready to cry. So yeah, it's a very special book and one that hopefully a lot of you will be able to pick up this year. And now, last but not least, we've got Emily Wilde's Compendium of Lost Tales by Heather Fawcett, which was book 3 to the Emily Wilde trilogy. Oh gosh, I loved this book. This one was so incredible and again very transportive. I had such a good time with this one. This one felt extra romantic and luscious, and I really loved seeing Wendell in his element. I was really glad to have finished this series because I'd read or reread the book 1 at the start of January, and it took me the entire year to finally get round to the third and final book, but I enjoyed this one just as much as the first one. I think the second one is probably my least favourite, or the one I'm least attached to, but I do feel like I should give that one another shot. Anyways, this one was so romantic and gorgeous. I just love seeing how Emily is so appalled by some of the things that she's seeing, but the scholarly woman in her just can't help but be absorbed and so excited about the things that she's witnessing as well. So her academic excitement really gets to me and makes me in turn excited to read about it. Such a well done series, and all in all a lovely wrap up to the Emily Wilde trilogy. So those are all the books that I really loved last year, and I've already started reading some incredible books this new year, so I'm looking forward to doing a 2026's reading wrap up. But for some final statistics, last year I read a total of 91 books. My best reading month was December with 10 books, and my worst reading month was July with 5 books. But I think overall I found some new favourites which I'm really pleased with, and yeah, I can't wait to see what other gems I can find this year as well. So I hope you guys really enjoyed watching today's video. Thank you so much for watching if you're still here. I know that it was a very long one. I just really missed talking to you guys and having someone to share about all the books that I've been reading and things that I've been getting up to. So do let me know what your favourite book of 2025 was in the comments below, and I'll see you guys in the next cozy video. Bye friends!